Welcome into another edition of NBA Sound System Canada. Feels good to be back. Bill McGregor here. Got my guy back, Kyle Irving, with me. First time recording since our NBA Finals preview. Got our schedules back aligned, and I'm so happy the timing couldn't be better. We are less than 48 hours removed from the Thunder winning an NBA title and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander putting a bow on one of the greatest NBA seasons of all time. Before we get into that, though, KI. What's up, man? Welcome back.
Good to be back. A little bit of like a 10-day hiatus, and I come back with a cold. So this is my Jordan flu game on the pod. But, so if I'm a little short or stuffy, that's why. But, excited as ever. Draft season. Gil always used to say that it's KI season. Now it's Gil McGregor season. He's the one that's been grinding the tape, doing all the work, all of that. But I've of course kept up with it too, and one of my favorite days of the year. So excited to get into the draft. Some of the trades that we've already seen. Obviously, break down what Shai and the Thunder were able to do in the NBA Finals, and it's a big week for NBA fans.
Yeah, man. I don't know if you had one. I know I had one back in the day. The shirt that says "Basketball Never Stops." That's literally where we are right now. Finals end on Sunday. Draft Wednesday, Thursday. Free agency the following Monday, and in between a bunch of trades. So we will try to get through all of that, knowing that there'll be more to discuss when the draft passes. So based on when you hear this, the draft may or may not have happened already. So we won't get too deep into that, but we will talk about some of the top prospects and some of the best fits. But before we get into that, Oklahoma City Thunder take Game 7. And first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Tyrese Halliburton tore his Achilles tendon 7 minutes into the game. Really kind of took the fun away from everything that was kind of happening. He's already had successful surgery at the same operations done by the same doctor who did it for Jason Tatum. And then after that, took a little while for the feeling in the game to kind of come back. There was a point in time where we're like, man, the Pacers are they really just going to like rally behind TJ McConnell and Benedict Mathurin and these guys in Halliburton's absence? But the third quarter Thunder showed up. Shai finished with 29 and 12 and was named Finals MVP. So if you're counting at home, that's Finals MVP, that's Western Conference Finals MVP, that's League MVP, and that's a scoring champ who, by the way, did get some votes for all defense as well. First scoring champ to win an NBA championship since Shaq in 2000. He joins Kareem, Michael Jordan, and Shaq as a guy who won scoring champion and Finals MVP in the same season. And it's just hard to encapsulate. Like, it's crazy because he said it after the game that it feels weird for him to be mentioned in that company, but he earned it. And for us, though, it feels the same way. Like, we watched this guy from being a scrawny rookie with the Clippers to now being his Finals MVP. So it says a lot about him and the Thunder as a whole. It's not just the Shai. It wasn't the Oklahoma City Shays. It was Oklahoma City Thunder. But, man, he had a crazy season.
Yeah, Shai. As the series went on, I feel like I was kind of teetering back and forth. Who do I want? Who do I find myself rooting for? Obviously, just rooting for good basketball. But, every time that I felt myself pulling for the Pacers, I was kind of but it would only be right that Shai caps off a historic season that, I think people now that they've won have started to realize just how historic this season was. Like you said, he won the MVP, he won the scoring title, he won Western Conference Finals MVP, he won Finals MVP. He had 40, 30, 20-point games, led the NBA in all, basically every aspect of scoring that you could lead the NBA in. And then, carried that into the postseason. And he was historic in the amount of 30-point games that he had in the postseason. It was him, MJ, and Kareem as the only players that have had 15-plus 30-point games.
Hakeem Olajuwon.
Yeah.
And Kawhi actually is Kawhi 15 plus.
Yeah. So, everything, it just felt like everything that he was doing was being put in a historical perspective, and he was that good if you were watching it. And, I was happy for him to be able to close that out. It felt like it was only right. But then that's where you kind of get into you're seeing all the reports of this is one of the most tame championship celebrations that anybody's ever seen. And they're talking about how none of the guys knew how to pop champagne because they're all so young. And I was kind of thinking why is that? But I think part of that is naturally I'm gonna bring this back to Boston last year, but it's they tried so hard to get over the mountaintop so many times, and just couldn't get there, and then they finally do it, and it's oh my God, we finally broke through. I think even the Warriors the year before that, it's obviously they had been over the mountain. In 2022, they had been over the mountaintop several times, but it's they weren't sure they were ever going to get back. So that celebration was as crazy as maybe the first one was, where with this Thunder team, I'm not saying they didn't face any adversity. It's more so just that they really only had, with this core, they really only had one playoff exit before they got over the mountaintop and made this happen. So, I think there is a level of like, one, I think that's part of like how Shea carries himself, and the team follows suit for the leader.
Yeah.
Like he keeps himself together, and he doesn't get too high or too low. And every game, like, Mark Dagnall would say it all the time too. Like, it's just like, play the game in front of you, like, win the next one. Like, and I think that they just did that all the way to the point they won the championship, and they still didn't even like really know how to like fully like bask in like the glory that just happened of winning the title. So, it was a different like kind of celebration. I think Tyrese Halliburton's injury had a lot to do with that too. It kind of like took some of the wind out of the game, and maybe they didn't want to like, overdo the celebration when the other team's star player had gotten hurt the way that he did. But, the Thunder, it was an incredible season. Awesome for Shea to cap it off the way that he did. And, seriously, one of the best individual seasons that we've ever seen in our lifetime.
Absolutely. I think when we look back, that game 4, and I talked about it on the pod actually, but when he willed them, right, it like when they couldn't get a bucket and everything suggested they were going to lose. They couldn't make a shot. They weren't assisting. The ball wasn't flowing very well for them at all. And there was that point, they're down 4. He hits a 3 when nobody can make a 3. Cut the deficit to 1. Then he had to step back, which was controversial, but he had to step back, put them ahead, and they never looked back. That is his finals MVP moment. That is his champion moment when we look back to what he did in this run, the 15, 30-point games, and there were ups and downs. But all of that stuff, man, like I think that was a big moment. And then game 5, it was Jalen Williams, J-Dub with 40 points. And, when you talked about it and you said, people could talk about them being Gen Z and Gen Z celebrating differently than we do. And it's kind of funny. I looked, there are only 2 millennials on that roster, and that's Alex Caruso and Kenrich Williams. So never felt older looking at any roster, the other professional team in my life. But thinking about that and the fact that Cason Wallace, it was just his second season in the league. It's Chet Holmgren's second season on the court. It's Jalen Williams' third season on the court, and it's all their second playoff run. To your point, that is crazy, right? Like, it's not normal that this team, runs to a roadblock once, and it was Luka Doncic and the Mavericks last year. Then they come back and they get to the mountaintop this year, and here they are. And, again, credit to Sam Presti and the way he built this team. And, there's so many guys on that team that have stepped up. Chet Holmgren was awesome in game 7. Isaiah Hartenstein, when they put him back in the starting lineup, figured it out. He was really good after that. Alex Caruso, take a bow, between him and Pascal Siakam on the other side. We learned a lot about why people talk about championship DNA. You saw it with both of those guys in the finals, and he kind of willed them and helped them in a lot of big spots where they needed a boost and needed a calming force in some of the situations that might have been or felt too big for them. And I guess I'll talk about the roster construction because, that hovering issue with money is way down the line. But right now, this is a young team. It's intact. The guys are under contract, and there's a lot of stuff that we'll get into happening around the league with other teams. But, they got over the mountaintop in year 2. Who's to say that they don't have a couple more in them in the next couple of years before things get scary with their salary situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's where, that's, the next question is, how are they going to find a way to balance the money that they have to pay Shea, they have to pay J-Dub, and they have to pay Chet? We're seeing teams kind of come apart as it is, like right now, because of the aprons and the salary cap rules they're trying to navigate and everything. And the Thunder have a nice little window at the moment to try and maximize as many championships as they possibly can. But, it's only a matter of time before that type of stuff starts to get in the way, and they have to kind of like break up this roster. But they're in a fortunate position because they have so many young players on their team that are still on their rookie contracts and things of that nature that, like, that type of stuff shouldn't be getting in the way of them competing for a championship next year and the year after that. And that's why you're seeing them being so heavily favored compared to everybody else. Like, I think they were like plus 250 in terms of title odds. And then like it's the Cleveland Cavaliers, who I think were like plus 600. I think.
Yeah, 800. 800.
And then after that, everybody's, 4 digits. So it's like, it really, and obviously like the Tyrese Halliburton injury, it extends well beyond just that one game. Like, he's going to be out for probably the entire season next year. And we already know JT is out for the entire season. So, that shakes up the entire landscape of the Eastern Conference. But, in terms of the Western Conference, like, I mean, I'm sure the Rockets are up there. I got to go back and look at the odds. I'm sure the Rockets are up there. They're probably second most, if I had to guess, in the Western Conference after they traded Kevin Durant. I know we're going to get into that. But when you're looking at definitive teams that can challenge the Thunder's run, like, the list isn't very long. The Cavs had plenty of warts that showed in the playoffs, and the Pacers exposed those. And who knows what that roster even looks like coming back. Sounds like they're trying to see if there's anything out there for Darius Garland. Like, the Pacers, did they just fall off a cliff with Tyrese Haliburton out? Like, who knows? No one knows what the Celtics are going to look like next year, and that's just in the East. In the West, it's going to be a gauntlet again, but there's no reason to believe why OKC can't get through that again. So, there's a reason they're that heavily favored. I don't see why there's any reason they wouldn't be able to get back next year, but at the same time, anything can happen, and Houston's coming, and there are some other young teams that are coming up. So, I'm curious to see who can really kind of challenge them next year from, repeating what they having like another duplicate of the season that they just had.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, though, and we talked about it, somebody was saying that, why are they saying this is a dynasty? Why are we crowning them already? It took them 7 to get past the Nuggets. It took them 7 to get past the Pacers as well. But kind of align with what we're getting ready to kind of segue into. One, they picked 15th to 24th in the draft. So whatever needs they might have, they could address it very well this week during the draft. There's also rumblings they're going to try and trade into the top 10. Does that mean they maybe try to get a center that's going to be the replacement for Hartenstein once his $81 million, he's got $54 million left on that deal. Once that's up, is that the situation? Is that the deal? Could they be a team who, I don't know, like trades for somebody like Sam Hauser, right? Because like shooting is something that they need. They're stagnant. And I don't know if the Celtics would help them out like that, but they could use shooting. The thing, they weren't a flawless team by any means. And I think that's what's scary is that their young guys can improve, but also there are a lot of flaws that they could handle, and they won despite those flaws. So now it's like, all right, now let's assess these and work on these and figure it out and kind of craft the team to where they've not only been there before and seen it before, they can also address some of their biggest issues to be even better prepared to do that moving forward. So we'll see what the trade market looks like. It's pretty wild. Since the last time I was on here on the solo after Game 4, there have been 4 trades in the NBA. We had Desmond Bane to Orlando. Yesterday, or day of Game 7, we had Kevin Durant to Houston, which is what we'll get into in a second. Last night, before we recorded this, Drew Holiday to Portland again, except he's going to be there. This time, Anthony Simons is now a Boston Celtic. And then today, kind of a weird swap, CJ McCollum and Kelly Olynyk to DC, and Jordan Poole and Sadiq Bey, I think the 40th pick in this upcoming draft, to New Orleans. So the big ones that impact the landscape of the NBA, especially these contenders, are the Desmond Bane trade and the Kevin Durant trade. We can spend 1 second talking about Desmond Bane because you and I texted about it, but you'll have your thoughts, and I don't have my thoughts on wax about it right now. And a lot has changed even since that deal. I think that this makes Orlando a team that could pull off a sneaky Indiana-like run next year because they've addressed their biggest need, and they're looking at a wide-open Eastern Conference with their flaws assessed.
Yeah, the Desmond Bane trade was, polarizing for all the right reasons. Like 4 first-round picks for a guy who's never been an all-star. Yeah. It's on paper, it's crazy, but then like when you really sit there and think about it, I'm not saying that it's not crazy that Desmond Bane is commanding 4 first-round picks, but in terms of fit, I mean, he's exactly what they need. Perfect. Someone who can create their own shot, someone who can knock down, catch and shoot threes, stretch the floor a little bit for Paolo and Franz, someone who's more consistent shooting the ball than, Jalen Suggs was and Cole Anthony was and any other guard they've had is. And then on top of that too, what were you going to say?
I was going to ask, you don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I was like, he's their most consistent shooter since, I don't know. You keep talking. I'll try to think about who the last consistent shooter they had.
I got an answer for you. Game 1, 2019, DJ Augustine against the Raptors. That's the most consistent shooter since then. That's the answer. But, if things all go, if things go as planned, the way that Orlando hopes it will, those picks will not be early first rounders. They'll be late first rounders. They're not going to be of very high value. Obviously, you can still get good players at the back end of the draft, but the way that they are hoping to have this franchise trend, the direction that they're hoping to trend in, maybe they're hoping that those 4 first round picks won't be as valuable as they might feel like they are right now. And then, I think you and I might have texted about this after the Tyrese Haliburton injury. And obviously that's, I'm not not trying to have a morbid way of thinking about it, but it's all of a sudden that trade looks even slightly better now that Haliburton's not going to be there next year because the door's open for another team to come in. So now genuinely speaking, is Orlando the second best team in the East next year, third best team in the East after New York? Still crowning Cleveland as number 1 right now. So
Detroit's in that mix too.
And Detroit's in that mix too, for sure. But it just feels all of a sudden that trade at the time was pretty heavily scrutinized. But then like when you kind of peel back the layers, Orlando is all of a sudden right on the doorstep of being one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference and a legitimate has a legitimate chance to represent the East in the NBA Finals next year.
Yeah, 100%. You never know what can happen. Like you see a run can happen. You see the Eastern Conference wide open. You bet on those young guys getting better. Thinking about the fact that the Magic still got where they got in the playoff race, despite all the time missed by Franz and all the time missed by Paolo with freak injuries, the exact same oblique strain between those two guys. So very interested to see kind of what that means. And again, they addressed a major need. So the Magic, Knicks, Pistons. Knicks still need a head coach, by the way. That hasn't happened since the last time we talked. The Knicks still don't have a head coach. And we've talked about that on 2 different pods now, even with the big gap. Still haven't made a head coaching hire. So that'll be a big thing that kind of dictates their ceiling this upcoming season. But in the sense of addressing needs, got to talk about KD to Houston. It's one of the targets that we mentioned, one of the places that he wanted to go. The deal ended up being Dillon Brooks, Jalen Green, and the 10th overall pick getting sent back to Phoenix. It was their pick in the first place. And Kevin Durant reunites with Ime Udoka. They had a season together in Brooklyn. Ime Udoka was assistant coach there. They also worked together with Team USA in the past. And apparently Ime Udoka really, really wanted KD. It also seems like the Rockets are going to come up and renegotiate with Fred VanVleet. So looking like Fred VanVleet, Amin Thompson, Kevin Durant, Jabari Smith Jr., and Alperen Şengün. I jokingly sent a meme of, the little young Spider-Man looking at older Spider-Man. I said that was KD and Jabari Smith Jr. this upcoming season down in Houston. So it's exciting, though. Again, the Western Conference is much more of a gauntlet than the East, but the Rockets needed a guy to go get buckets for them until Amin Thompson becomes a guy, which I still firmly believe. But you look up a guy in the dictionary, you probably see a picture of Kevin Durant.
I mean, Kevin Durant is exactly what you and I talked about. If we were to go back and revisit the trade deadline pods, and you and I were both huge advocates for the Rockets trying to go get Jimmy Butler. And Kevin Durant is even another level higher than Jimmy Butler in terms of go get me a bucket or, just a consistent scoring presence every single night. It's exactly what Houston needed. He's a perfect fit. I cannot believe that the Suns couldn't find a way to get Jabari Smith Jr. in that deal. That really, really shocks me that I understand that the money probably wouldn't have worked if it was him and Jalen Green in the draft pick. Like they probably needed Dillon Brooks' contract in order to make that money work. But, to me, like that's a player who still has a ton of upside and he was playing really well before his hand injury last year and played pretty well after the hand injury, a little bit more shaky, but, still showed plenty of promise. And now, like you said, like he gets to get mentored by Kevin Durant. Like that's almost like 2 birds, 1 stone for the Rockets to not have to give him up and then now have the perfect player to, be in the gym with him constantly and showing him how he can improve a little bit, creating his own shot off the dribble and things like that. He'll never be a Kevin Durant level scorer, but I do think that there's still some untapped potential there and a reason why a lot of people thought that he was going to be the number 1 overall pick in that draft. That also just works out in Houston's favor as well. But, more so than anything else, like this is a team that was already competitive in this last year's playoffs.
52 wins.
Much postseason experience, 52 wins in the regular season, really well coached. They have a great mix of vets and, they already re-signed Steven Adams. Like you said, it sounds like they're trying to work towards a deal on bringing Fred VanVleet back. Like Kevin Durant, obviously a leader and a veteran in his own right. So now you have a team that really, really needed like Jalen Green to be that guy and kind of like, all right, is he going to show up for us this night? Is he not going to show up for us this night? And he kind of answered that question himself in the playoffs with too many inconsistent performances. And now, he's headed to Phoenix where I don't know what they got going on over there and what their game plan is with him and Book and can they get rid of Bradley Beal? And, they still have a lot of work to do on that side of things in terms of the roster construction. But in Houston, everything is looking really good. Everything's lining up really nicely for them to be, in my opinion, the biggest challenger to Oklahoma City next year.
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting to me, and I have 2 questions for you. One, a lot of people are saying they're going to miss Dillon Brooks, and I think they will. Dillon Brooks had a big role with that team, and I think the big thing is going to be, okay, Tari Eason, step up. You're going to have to, what did you learn from him, right? Like, what can you be that kind of guy for this team and make those moments? Because those, as we've learned, especially during these playoffs, you need guys like that to make deep runs and to win championships. It's great to have the guy, but also what's your supporting cast going to do and how reliable can they be? Even if it's just for home games or 75% of the playoff games, we need this, right? And the other thing, and I think I know where you stand. I know where I stand, but it's just crazy. I saw it was a meme on Twitter, like, man, Nick's Twitter is talking about Kevin Durant. Like, he's this guy. It was like a 70-year-old getting a workout in. It's like, yeah, Kevin Durant will be 37 next year, but he's still Kevin Durant. He played at an All-NBA level last year. Had he played in 3 more games, he would have been All-NBA last year. So I do think that the talk about Kevin Durant and his age and what he can offer at this age is a little overblown, especially because, like you said, it feels like, yeah, it does feel like they didn't give that much up, but they did give 2 starters off of a 50-win team. So it feels like it was a fair, even return as far as that goes. And it does feel pretty even. I think that the Rockets don't take a step back. They just kind of adjust, and they'll be probably another 52-win team next year.
Yeah, Tari Eason, like being able to hold on to him when they're giving up Dylan Brooks is also huge, because like that gives them, and Amen Thompson is obviously a defensive stopper as well in his own right, but like that gives them another player who's similar to Dylan Brooks in terms of the different, the variety of positions that he can guard. And I don't know if they're planning on starting Jabari Smith Jr. or Tyrese. And I know there are reports that Jabari Smith might be back in the starting lineup there. So, that's a lot of size and length between him and KD and Alperen Şengün and, obviously
and Thompson.
and Amen Thompson. And yeah, exactly. With his athleticism and length and speed and all that, like that's a fun group. They're going to be able to, like, Ime Udoka is really going to be able to have some fun with that roster, and not for nothing too. It also clears the way for, guys like Reed Shepherd to maybe get some more minutes. Like that's a player that a lot of people were really high on in the draft going into the draft last year. And, the team ended up being more competitive than I think that the public thought that they were going to be.
Right.
So that's why Reed Shepherd really spent most of his time in the G League this year, kind of polishing his game and whatnot. But, they took him with the number 3 overall pick for a reason. And maybe now with Jalen Green gone, he gets an opportunity to step into that backup guard role and kind of turn into the player that a lot of people thought that he could be coming out of the draft. So, this is a very big win for the Rockets. I thought they handled it perfectly. I thought like the way that they were able to send out a handful of players that, that they were probably willing to part ways with in DB and Jalen Green, and then a draft pick that, is not of a ton of use to them right now with the direction that they want to be competing in. And, the players that are left on that roster are still championship caliber. With Ime Udoka at the helm, I really think they're going to be, probably second, third, maybe fourth best team in the NBA next year.
Yeah. And as we wrap here, before we go to a quick break, we'll talk about the other trade. Sorry, Wizards and Pelicans fans, we're not really going to get into that one. Wizards are going to have a lot of cap space next summer. We'll talk about them then. But the trade that sends Drew Holiday to Portland, Anthony Simons to Boston, big money-saving move for the Celtics. We talked about it on the pod already. We knew that changes were coming. We knew that we probably had seen the Celtics championship core play their last games together. But I graded this deal. I gave Boston a B. I think it's kind of incomplete. We'll see how it plays out. I gave Portland a C+. I just think, they have a young team. It could be better than we realize. Maybe it's like Chris Paul going to OKC a couple years ago, and this team is a little bit better than we realized because Drew Holiday is so malleable. And he and Toumani Camara will be fearsome on defense. Matisse Thybulle's back. He can also mentor Scoot Henderson. Mentorship is in 2025. That being said, what are your thoughts, especially how close you are to this deal? I know I had one Celtics fan tell me, don't hate it, don't love it. Where do you stand now that we're like 16 hours removed from it?
I do think that it's a deal that kind of works out in both ways. I know like the Blazers are kind of getting a lot of slack last night for, how are they giving up a young, valuable player and picks in a deal that the Celtics had to get out of. But I do think that, like, especially if the reports are true, they plan on keeping Drew Holiday. Like you said, mentorship is in 2025, but also, like that is a pretty ferocious and tenacious defense that they, even down the home stretch of the season started playing really, really good on the defensive end. And between him and Toumani Camara, Donovan Clingan, and then that opens up a pathway for Scoot Henderson to play more, Shaedon Sharpe to play more. Like I think it's a step in the direction of where they want to take the franchise next. And then when you look on the Celtic side of it, like I really like Anthony Simons for them in the sense that he fits in perfectly. He's going to be able to bomb away from three. He averaged like 8.5 3-point attempts per game.
I might be 10 next year.
Yeah, exactly. He's one of like 6 players that have averaged at least 3 threes per game over each of the last 4 seasons. He's a prolific bucket getter. He doesn't really play much defense, so that part of it's going to be interesting to see if Joe Mazzulla can get him to lock in on that end of the floor. But in a season where he's on an expiring contract and you need to replace Jason Tatum's 27 points per game, and Jaylen Brown and Derek White and Peyton Pritchard can only take on so much of that, I like the opportunity for Anthony Simons to come in with a green light, really fire away from 3, fits in perfectly on the offensive side of the ball, and if it works out and you want to sign him to a contract extension after that, then great. Then you made a good deal. But if not, like, this is going to be a good opportunity for him to boost his trade value. And at the end of the season, if it doesn't work out, then, then maybe they ship him off and they can get draft picks or someone in return that better fits what they're looking to do on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Like thinking about, it's happened with Malcolm Brogdon, right? Like got him there. And then, obviously it's a little bit different with this contract situation, but like you bring a guy in, it doesn't necessarily work. And then you just, move on and nothing's really lost from there. So again, got younger, saved a bunch of money. I think that the Celtics are now only 18 million over the second apron. I think that's what ESPN Bobby Marks said. So probably not done. I know I mentioned Sam Hauser earlier in the show. Kristaps Porzingis may have played his last game in green as well. So we'll definitely see how that kind of unfolds and how that plays out. And the Celtics do have a late first round pick and an early second round pick. So they'll also be probably trying to address some needs during the NBA draft this year, which is a good position to be in, to have guys who won't make that much money. But if you pick the right guy, they can make an immediate impact. So that'll be something that we'll keep an eye on. Speaking of the draft, we'll go to a quick break, and Kyle and I will have a few thoughts on the NBA draft, even though by the time you hear this, it might already be underway. But we'll talk about it for a second. Yeah, Kyle and I were already in draft mode basically during the break, so we got the juices flowing already. But we start at the top. We've talked about it plenty of times already. We know with 99% certainty that the top two picks is going to be Cooper Flagg to Dallas, Dylan Harper to San Antonio. We don't have to get too far into all of that stuff, but it is important to kind of talk about, how we envision that Cooper Flagg playing with Kyrie once he's healthy, and Anthony Davis, and then Dylan Harper. It seems like they're going to hold on to everybody. So it's going to be him, Stephon Castle, and De'Aaron Fox helping Wemby out and getting the ball to Wemby. That's the most important thing that all three of those guys need to be able to do, get the ball to number one. But your thoughts about the top two picks in this draft, and, it feels like it's not often where we have not just a consensus number one, but consensus number one and number two, and it doesn't matter about fit, all that other stuff. They're going there, and we'll figure the rest out later.
Yeah, the number two pick is interesting to me because obviously like very high on Dylan Harper like everyone else, but I can only imagine some of the offers that San Antonio has gotten for that pick. And like with De'Aaron Fox and Stephon Castle like already there, already thriving, like I am slightly surprised that they haven't even entertained offers for the number two pick. But also like, as we've seen, you can't have too many playmaking ball handlers, and he's someone that, is as NBA ready as any prospect in this class. So you're trying to build the best roster possible around Wemby that fits the same timeline. Why would you not get a 19-year-old who is ready to play, can handle the ball, can get the ball to Wemby, like you said? So, it does make sense in that sense. But, there is some overlap between him and Stephon Castle as well. And then, Cooper Flagg, we talked about it after the draft lottery. Like, what better position could you be in than going to Dallas, where you're going to be competing for a championship right away? We actually didn't even mention them at all when we were talking about threats to Oklahoma City. Like, that is talk about a legitimate threat. And obviously Kyrie, we don't, maybe closer to the All-Star break is probably when he'll be back. But, if he can even get back to 75% of what he was last season, like, again, that's a team that could easily challenge Houston, easily challenge Oklahoma City. But, what I love most about the Cooper Flagg fit, and I think I did say this around the draft lottery, is that he is someone who defense is already his calling card. Like that is what brings his floor so high. And he can just go to Dallas and focus on defending and being like a third, fourth scoring option. And his offensive game can slowly come along as it needs to. And he'll still have 20-point scoring nights, but there are probably some nights where he only has 10 points, but he has 3 blocks and 2 steals. Like that's what excites me about this fit for Cooper Flagg, is that his offensive game is going to get to grow slowly but surely as he, is playing alongside guys like AD, playing alongside guys like Kyrie, really get himself comfortable on that end of the floor, but he'll be able to defend at a high level and kind of fill in the gaps of everything that they need for, a two-way player on the wing in the meantime, which is super exciting for him because there are not many rookies that get to go into a situation like that and kind of ease themselves, or number one overall picks that get to, fall into a situation where they can ease themselves into the NBA in general.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, like, you see it a lot. There's a different type of ways to develop. You can go play for those really bad teams and just kind of chuck it up and, figure it out over time. And then you start playing to win, and you like have those lessons that come with you. Or you have the situation he's in right now, kind of like you were saying, there's not a lot of pressure on him to do things offensively. It's kind of more of a luxury for him to be able to do that. And like, the other guys on that team too, they have Klay Thompson. Najee Marshall was great in moments last year. They just signed an extension, Daniel Gafford, but he's still eligible to be traded within the next 6 months. So he might not be there for certain, but they have Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively as well. So a lot of guys who, those guys aren't prolific scorers, but they'll score the ball a little bit. So it's not like, oh, Coop, you got to go out there and score 22 a game to like be the second fiddle to Anthony Davis. Like that's not the case at all. So I think that they'll be able to ease him in a lot. Jason Kidd is still going to be there. He's been a rookie in Dallas before. He understands that franchise and how stuff works as well. So excited to kind of see how that works. And I was inspired by somebody asked me, and I won't quiz you, but I'm just going to throw it out there. I only know of 3 instances that it's happened before, but 3 number 1 picks on the same team. We'll have Cooper Flag, Kyrie, and AD. There's also LeBron, AD, and Dwight won a championship together. Back in Minnesota, Cat, D. Rose, Andrew Wiggins didn't win a championship together. But then you also have back in Showtime Lakers, Michael Thompson, Magic, and Kareem. So now this is be the 4th. It might have happened in addition to those, especially maybe in like the 50s or 60s. But for fact from what I saw, those 3 times. So very rare you see 3 number 1 picks on the same roster, but we'll see that in Dallas this year. Now, shifting forward, again, there's so much other stuff. There's so much uncertainty in the draft. It all kind of starts at 3 with the 76ers. I don't know if it's going to be VJ Edgecombe. Ace Bailey's had a very strange pre-draft process, so we won't get into the specifics of players, but we can talk about some team needs and prospects who we are thinking that are going to be ready. And I guess my thought or question to you, I guess, in the sense, a superlative of guys who you think are most NBA ready or who you're most excited to see at the next level and make an impact at the next level.
Yeah, I know Concanipple is a name that comes up a lot for like NBA ready, just someone who can knock down shots. He's comfortable with the ball in his hands. Defensively, I'm not exactly sure. Like, will he be a target at the NBA level? Probably.
Yeah.
But just whenever you can shoot the ball like that consistently, that automatically kind of puts you in that bucket for me. And then, a player who, as far as like NBA readiness, I'm not sure if like I would put him in the category of like the most NBA ready players, but someone whose game I think will translate at a really high level to the NBA is Trey Johnson. Like he's someone that can score from all 3 levels of the floor, super athletic. He's comfortable creating his own shot. And he's someone who I think has the, like, kind of like we were just talking about with Cooper Flag. Like, I don't know what Cooper Flag's rookie season stat line looks like because of the role that he may or may not have offensively. But like Trey Johnson's someone where if he ends up in the right situation and he has the ultimate green light, like there's no reason this guy can't come in and start averaging 20, 22, 25 points per game, like right off the bat, if he lands in the right situation. So, those are 2 players that I have my eye on. And to see like where they end up on draft night tomorrow night, I don't know if there's anybody that, you are particularly high on landing in a certain situation where maybe he could step in right away and thrive. But those are 2 guys that come to mind for me.
Yeah, it's funny when you talked about Trey Johnson. First off, I did, and it's a shameless plug right here. If you want to go with sporting news, I'm trying to take the mantle from Kyle and doing our pre-draft coverage. Tough act to follow, but I'm doing my best. But with the big board and the mock draft, I did some player comparisons when I was looking at who I wanted to compare Trey Johnson to. I settled on Allen Houston, and I think it's kind of cool to do a little blend of throwback guys and current guys and maybe some crossover stuff like that. But Allen Houston was a guy, if you're not familiar with his game or if you need a reminder, this time with the Knicks, just pure jumper, pure scorer. And again, we talked about Trey Johnson before. Freshman, led the SEC in scoring, which everybody considered the best conference in basketball this past year. Shade under 20 points per game as a freshman in a tough basketball conference, and now he gets to benefit from NBA spacing, so I'm excited to see that. Same thing for VJ Edgecombe. I'm excited about him because I think that he's going to be one of those players where, and at times he looked a little, not lost, but there were some inconsistencies, as with most freshmen at Baylor last year, but I think he's going to benefit greatly from NBA spacing. If it's Philadelphia or not, whatever it is, I think he has the ability to be a plus defender from day one. He has the athletic skills and the athletic tools. Also, he's a relentless competitor. I remember when he played, with the Bahamian national team, I remember seeing him play on the circuit and just watching the way he kind of carried himself, the way he talked, his talk to everybody on the court. There's a certain level of confidence that he has as well. So really excited about him as far as pro readiness. Prospects in general, and I think we've been saying this from the beginning, Kama Malawach is a guy who definitely has some clear flaws. People say his hands aren't great. He left a lot to be desired on defensive boards to say he's as big as he is. But reminder, he's only been playing basketball like 5 or 6 years. So for a guy who's been playing basketball 5 or 6 years, who's already looked LeBron in the eye on the Olympic stage and played at Duke, and I saw him play in person, I think that's what it was for me. He just takes up so much space. And his ability to just run the floor and be a lob threat and take up space defensively makes me think he has a very high ceiling. And we could be revisiting this, 2-3 years down the line when he makes a big leap each year and be like, man, he should have gone higher in this draft. So that's kind of not a sleeper, but somebody who I'm like, maybe that's one that we end up overthinking right now in the moment.
I know that he's a player that the Raptors have been linked to very heavily, and I'm sure Raptors fans would love to hear it. Like, tell me if you disagree with this, but like, Kevin Malawach ceiling, Serge Ibaka.
I can see it, but just even bigger, which is crazy.
Yeah, taller. Yeah, but like in terms of, I don't think that he has like the defensive, at least right now, like you said, he's only been playing basketball for a little bit, defensive instincts that Ibaka does. Ibaka obviously eventually ended up extending his range beyond the 3-point line throughout his NBA career. Malawach has already shown some signs of that. He didn't do much shooting like that at Duke, but when he was playing for the South Sudanese national team, he did. So he's a player that, the Raptors, it feels like they at some point will have to use Jakob Poeltl as a trade chip. And, if they want to continue to get younger and build around Scotty Barnes in that timeline, and, bringing in someone like Kevin Malawach would be massive to have a young up and coming center that they feel like could be, the defensive anchor of the future. Is he going to be around for the Raptors pick? That's a whole nother question. Would they have to trade up if they want to get him? That's where, kind of like Gil was saying, things get interesting after the third pick in the draft. But also, like, on that subject, when you were talking about VJ Edgecombe and like his potential fit with the 76ers, I was just thinking to myself that it's pretty rare that we have 3 teams at the top of the draft who are all trying to compete. Like, obviously the Sixers were far from that last season, and the Spurs ended up shutting it down early. And Dallas was a unique situation, obviously, with the trade and then, everybody getting hurt. But like, these are 3 teams that all have hopes of competing. So they don't necessarily have the luxury to draft a raw prospect who isn't ready to play right away. And that's where, I really think that like VJ Edgecombe is someone who he actually fits pretty well with what the Sixers are trying to do. And it feels like he's kind of the favorite to be that pick at number 3. And that's where Dylan Harper and Cooper Flagg making the impact they can is also interesting. But, when you say the draft starts at 3, like, I don't know if there's any other players that you have in mind that maybe would fit in Philly, or, if there's other guys or other teams that you think might be able to trade up, where maybe those teams could trade back and find somebody else that would be a better fit and maybe get more assets in the future too.
Yeah, I think if Philly just stays put, it's Edgecombe, but I do think that, it seems like they're teams who are enamored with Ace Bailey. It seems like the Pelicans might try to get up there. It seems like the Wizards might try to get there. I think Utah's content being at 5. But I do think there is that outside chance that maybe Philadelphia feels comfortable, maybe either just getting somebody else or, saying we think we can get VJ at 5 or whatever it is, even if it's just marginally trading up one spot or something like that to see how that plays out. So I think that's why that, we'll get a lot of movement. I think we're going to continue to get more trades. So by the time you hear this, there are probably going to be some other trades that have happened. But yeah, I think it's just interesting from that perspective. Before we wrap here, the other part of what I was going to talk about was just some sleeper prospects. I know I did a story on that as well. Guys, I'm thinking about like Nick Clifford. You and I talked about him from Colorado State, and the sleeper in the sense that older guys often get written off, right? So he's a guy who he's 23 years old, had a 5-year college career, I believe. But now here he is, like, quickly rising up the draft board. So guys like that, I'm interested to see somebody like Rasheer Fleming, who measured really well, got crazy wingspan, played at St. Joe. So not a lot of people are locked in to what's happening at St. Joe's, Atlantic 10, I believe. So it's interesting to kind of see those guys who people will get introduced to, but also a lot of international guys as well in this draft. So going to be a very interesting draft class, guys, to get familiar with. And I think, we've said this in years past, and I'm curious of what you think, but it does kind of feel like there are a lot of guys who can, at the very least, fulfill a very specific role so long as they land in the right situation.
Yeah, there's, I feel like it's almost like guys who are specialists that, especially when you get to the back end of the first round where, there are a lot of teams that are picking that feel like they are 1 or 2 pieces away. And, it might not be in their best interest to draft a 19-year-old who needs a lot of developing. And that's where you see guys like Peyton Pritchard, get drafted. That's where you see guys like in the early second round, Jalen Brunson get drafted. Like, you'd rather put your trust in an upperclassman player like that. And that's where guys like you said, Nick Clifford, like Walter Clayton is another one that's extremely, it's going to be interesting to see, where he falls and how far does he fall. So I don't know if there's a ton of like upperclassmen that are going to land in the back end of the first round in this year's draft. Like I know Danny Wolf is another player who feels like his stock is falling a little bit. I like his game. I think that his game could translate to the NBA level as a 7-footer who can dribble, pass, shoot. But it does get interesting in the back end of the first round where you have these contenders that are looking for guys who can do very specific things. And if they don't have, a 19-year-old in mind that can, maybe be someone that will be a part of the rotation down the stretch, or not down the stretch, in the future. Instead they maybe are going to try and target an upperclassman who, fills a very specific role and could play a couple minutes off the bench on their team right now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that my final thought is this is the new era of, the draft and draft talks. There are a lot of guys who in years past would have been in the draft, but they are back in college to get more money than they would have made on their first year rookie contract. I'm curious to see a couple other guys, a couple of names that throw out there. I think Tyrese Proctor in the right situation could fulfill a Derek White-like role. I still really like Maxime Reynaud from Stanford. And we got a huge influx of more French talent coming in. Noah Senge. I don't know where you stand. Him leaving his team up in the finals. I don't know if you saw that.
I did see that.
Yeah. Where do you stand on that? Does that turn you off if you were a GM, or you're like, oh man, this guy wants to fulfill his lifelong dream?
That's so tough because, like, on one hand, like Wemby, for example, like stuck it out all the way until the end, until they made it to the championship and lost. Like, on one hand, you want them to be present for the team that they're competing for right now, but on the other hand, like, how do you blame a kid for coming overseas early to make sure that everything is in order? He can do his interviews, he can do his so that's a tough balance. Like, I think it depends on who you are as a GM. Like myself personally, like I would probably be like, it's a little tough that you left your team early, but at the same time, like you have to look at the other side of the coin of like
your team now.
You're doing what's best for your future. And like, if you're not like, I mean, listen, obviously they're scouting these guys nonstop. And I don't know how much opportunity scouts have to talk to players like that overseas throughout the season when they go to scout them and things like that. But like for this kid, like, maybe this is the only opportunity that he's had to actually speak to these NBA teams and give them an idea of like, hey, this is who I am. And if he's not doing those types of interviews, maybe that's the reason that he falls out of the first round and goes in the second round. That's a massive difference in money. So in guaranteed money as well. So it's hard to hold that against someone, but I did see that he was, at his pre-draft media availability today, streaming the game on his phone, trying to stay involved. And I'm sure he's talking to his teammates and everything like that. So, on one hand, it is tough that you kind of leave him stranded, but on the other hand, it's, he's doing what's best for his future.
Yeah, 100%. Because I mean, obviously, you don't. Again, like you said, you don't want to think the worst, but anything could happen. Like you get injured. We saw Nikola Topic last year, right? Like playing with his team, and then ends up, I think that might have happened in the workout, but whatever it was, like tore his ACL, and like that, he didn't play his rookie season. So in the back of your mind, I'm sure an NBA team's like, you know what, like if you're good to go for summer league and you're good to go on opening night, we won't hold that against you. Like he's just 18, literally just 18 years old. So I'm excited to see, where he lands. Another name I floated around could be a potential Raptor as well. He does fit that mold for what they've got going on. So hopefully we'll be back. This will definitely maybe have one more for you this week coming out of the NBA draft. 2-day event again this year. So round 1 on Wednesday, June 25th, and then round 2 on Thursday, June 26th. I have a feeling there won't be as many eyes on round 2 this year just because I think it's not going to be as entertaining as round 2 was last year, but still there'll be a lot of picks and value to be had, and we'll see some names, especially some college stars, go in the second round. So in the perfect world, hopefully we'll be back to you. Kyle and I will react to what we saw during the NBA draft. Surely set to see some more trades this week, and then next week, Monday, free agency opens. Not a lot of teams with a lot of money, which means there'll be even more trades. So again, the most craziest offseason ever is already off to a pretty crazy start, but it's got a ways to go to at least match with 2019. So we'll see how that goes. As always, thank everybody for tuning in to the podcast, finding us and subscribing wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube and following us on Instagram. We'll get back to having bonus content throughout the week as we get into the NBA offseason and get into the thick of the WNBA season because a lot is going on over there as well. For Kyle Irving, my name is Gil McGregor. We will catch you back here later this week to react to the NBA draft. Catch you then.